My name is Representative Chabria, and I will be the PO for the next session. I will quickly go over our procedures so we can get into the speeches. I will give 1 tap at 2 minutes, 2 taps at 2:30, and 3 taps at 2:55. And at 3:05, I will gavel you down until 3:10 so you're inaudible. Please do not use this grace period. For questions, I will give 1 tap at 20 seconds and 2 taps at the end of the questioning block, and I will say the name of the next senator. I have the same definitions of prefacing and back and forth questioning as the previous presiding officers, and with that, the chair looks for motions.
Only personal privilege. I go for the next period.
Motion.
Questioners in the
Any seconds? Any opposition? We are chambers back in session. Seeing as we left off on a affirmation speech, the chair now seeks for a speech in negation. Any of all speeches, any and all representatives' speech in negation, please rise. That goes to Representative Snyder.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Senator Snyder. This is my second time speaking today, first time speaking this legislative session, and I will begin with a nod or a gesture.
Negation or affirmation? We're trying to...
Negation. Limbo used to be our favorite game to play as children, watching as the bar would lower and everybody would struggle to get underneath it. Now today I ask you one question. How low are we really willing to go? Because meaning that this bill doesn't actually expand rights, but rather lowers them. Therefore, it is for these two contentions. It increases inconsistencies and it harms inhabited territories we must negate. This brings me to my first contention. It increases inconsistencies. Now, according to Syracuse University in 2023, those born in American Samoa are U.S. nationals, not citizens. And in 2022, the Supreme Court declined to hear an appeal seeking to give U.S. citizenship. So Senator Dowdy realized that by giving them representation, but not even citizenship, only harms our government in the end. Because what we see in this status quo is that the judicial branch, in overstepping them, will only threaten our integrity of our government. But rather, they further with this, because the Supreme Court continues to believe with their beliefs. As of 2024, they still believe that those who don't have U.S. citizenship should not be provided with representation. So today, we must realize that our government is at stake in the passage of this legislation, but rather it gets worse. Because according to the IRS in 2024, Puerto Rico does not pay federal income tax unless they have U.S.-based income. And the residents of the other 4 inhabited territories pay taxes to their local governments instead of the IRS. Now, by granting a senator to these territories without giving them the full obligation of taxes, we're going to see that their influence on our legislation and our laws will only affect those in the states. So yes, I do agree that statehood must be looked at for these territories, but giving them this representation without giving them the full access to our taxes will only harm us in the end. Showing these inconsistencies, we must fail this legislation, which brings me to my second contention. It actually harms inhabited territories. So to answer your question, Senator Doe, this is how we harm it, since no other senator wants to talk about how the harms are actually present in today's debate. Now, the U.S. maintains a large presence of military in these territories, and this provides such an economic growth for them. Because according to the CRS reports, as of June of 2024, changing the political status to senatorial representation for these U.S. territories makes it 13 times more likely to decrease the military presence of the territory. Moreover, the Readiness and Environmental Protection Integration Program in 2022 said that Guam, the DoD contributes 30% of the island's economy, and this is shown without every other inhabited territory. So when we pass today, we actually harm these by taking away their funding and taking away their money. So realize that today's bill will only lower their own rights. So I ask you one more question. How low are we willing to go? Thank you.
Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 3 minutes and 5 seconds. I repeat again for the judges, that is 3 minutes and 5 seconds. Seeing as this was a speech, not a first cycle speech, the chair now seeks 2 blocks of direct questioning. All those with questions, please rise. This goes to Representative Batra.
Right, so do we give them full representation in the status quo or even with this legislation?
No.
Then why would we tax them fully as well?
Because when we give them representation, they're
But
putting
not
their
full
input on. Can I
representation.
please answer and
Sure,
finish?
yeah.
Thank you. So when we give them and let them have their full input onto our tax policies, we're going to see that this is going to affect the American and the U.S. states more than it's actually going to
Right,
help them.
and once again, is this full representation or partial
So it's
representation?
giving them representation in the Senate,
Partial representation.
which is, yes, it's still kind of representation.
And is that
so
full
they're still
taxation
going
or
to affect the
Representative
policies.
Segerson.
Okay, so I told you that Puerto Rico and these other territories are often like not given the proper amount of aid. So how you, yeah, so, and you're saying, sorry, what did you say about taxing?
So taxing, they don't face the full amount of taxes that.
So we
US
shouldn't,
states
so
do.
we shouldn't give
So
them
this
money.
is, so they're actually just going to suffer more from policies. So I agree with your contentions, but here's where you actually fail. Because this perpetuates the harm because they're going to lose the money from their GDP and they're only
Okay,
going to
how are
suffer
they,
even
how
more.
are they gonna lose their money from their
Because
GDP?
they
They're not,
they
who's
focus
getting
on our
taxed?
military.
Thank you, Representatives. You may take your seats.
Okay, I thank the chair.
The chair thanks you. Seeing as this was the speech and then the negation, the chair now seeks a speech and the affirmation. All those with such speeches, please rise now. That goes to Representative Batra.
Thank the chair. My name is Senator Batra once again. Spelled B-A-T-R-A. This is my second time speaking today. Second time this legislative session. Obviously, once again, that is Senator Batra, B-A-T-R-A. And as always, I'm at the leisure of those above me, so with indication probably be our judges, I will begin. Hall of Fame inductee Nicole Freifogel said during our speech and debate opening ceremony yesterday morning that the opposite of war isn't peace, it's creation. Don't go to war with this legislation. Foster creation, not annihilation. But first, allow me to contextualize this debate. Senator Sylvester starts framing this debate by showing what happens when we give territories senatorial representation. Let me show you the other side of the debate and explain what happens if we don't. The United States is witnessing the slow death of its territories, not by natural disaster, but by federal abandonment. In Puerto Rico, Edwin Melendez, the director of the Center for Puerto Rican Studies at Harvard College, estimates that up to 200,000 Puerto Ricans will move to the mainland over the next year. Guam faces a similar situation, with over half of its college graduates vanishing within the next 3 years. Not for opportunity, but survival, leaving military hospitals so understaffed that some nurses report having to be forced to care for 150 patients at a time. This policy is the solution to these problems. Hawaii's statehood in 1959 reversed its brain drain, triggering a 400% GDP surge in 2 decades as doctors and scientists returned to rebuild these communities. But we also see a reversal of this brain drain because political representation improves the quality of life in these territories themselves. Senator Sylvester mentions in his affirmative speech how in the past the U.S. has tried to offer proper funding to these territories, but because they have no incentive to donate funds, they never do. Let me expand on the relevance of this issue. FEMA funding for natural disasters is going into debate next year, in 2026, and is going to continuously be debated year and year after. And that is exactly why territories need to be part of the voting process as soon as possible. That is a net benefit, not a net harm, Senator Schneider. Especially because the Coalition of Human Needs writes that negligence in 2017 was responsible for 2,975 people who died in Hurricane Maria. Pass this policy, give territories a voice in this legislation, reverse the brain drain. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, or in other words, the negation's top arguments. Senator Kandari, Kern, Vega, and Schneider, I understand your concerns regarding this legislation's effect on constitutional precedent. But let me remind you, the first 6 words of this legislation quite literally say, a resolution to amend the Constitution. We're not going against the Constitution, we're amending it. Senator Kandari and Senator Vega, I understand that this representation may not be quote-unquote enough, but taxation with partial representation is always better than taxation with no representation. It's time we stop stifling creation in favor of conflict. It's time we stop stifling creation in favor of inaction. It's time we stop stifling creation in favor of failure. Pass this policy. Change that precedent. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 2 minutes and 58 seconds. I repeat again for the judges, that was 2 minutes and 58 seconds. Seeing as that was not a first cycle speech, the chair now seeks 2 blocks of direct questioning. All those with questions, please rise now. That goes to Representative Coleman.
Hey Senator, so I and Senator Vega have both established that Washington DC does not have a senator. Why would we
Sure,
go?
this is a resolution, we can amend that and add it to other territories. Other senators have
Under
already
this
established
resolution,
that.
it states specifically the following territories will gain 1
Right,
senator
this
and
is
then
a
proceeds to
resolution, we can
list
change that.
territories.
This is not a bill, this is a resolution, we can change that.
But it proceeds to list territories, all except for DC.
Right, we can change that.
Thank you.
Representative Vega.
Okay, so in 1959, when Hawaii became a state, as we both established, was this through statehood or was it through partial
Sure, it's
representation?
statehood, but either way, partial representation is better than no representation, especially considering that we have taxation.
So
and
how?
status
Since
quo.
I've already proved that in my speech that it is harm DC, how exactly does your point stand?
I don't remember you proving that it is harm DC, could you please do it?
In harming DC, it's partial representation in DC, and that is simply fair.
Right, because it doesn't make sense that we give them representation and give them advocacy that essentially harms them. That's always going to be a net positive. I proved that with Senator Sylvester.
Thank you, Representative. Seeing negligible time, the chair will absorb the remaining 4 seconds.
Thank you,
And
Chair.
seeing as that was the speech in the affirmation, the chair now seeks a speech in the negation. Any also speeches in the negation, please rise. That goes to Representative Dew.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, everyone. That's Representative Dew speaking for the second time today, first time this legislative session. The discussion of all those about me. I'll begin. Guam has several nicknames, like America's unsinkable aircraft carrier or Fortress Pacific. But there's one name that's been forgotten in this debate. The name the people of Guam champion and cherish. Ours. Every single person, whether in our heartland or in our territories, deserves representation. But when we indiscriminately lock them into our own political system and choose for them what their representation should look like, we perpetuate that legacy of ignoring what the people truly want. That's why we fail. First, we've talked about the power to politic, but Senator Batra, after 7 speeches in today's debate, it's time we finally talk about the power to choose. Because this legislation doesn't stop to consider whether every single one of the U.S. territories in question actually wants to be further integrated into the chaos of American politics. The Washington Times explains on February 20, 2020, American Samoans are happy with their status. In fact, their government stated that interfering in their political system by forcing the rights and responsibilities that come with increased representation threatens the Samoan way of life, a way of life that includes the sharing of 90% of land and the belief that ownership should only stay under Samoan families. That's why David Emerwar, Associate Professor of History at Northwestern University, explains on March 29, 2019, the first step toward improving representation for the territories should be to let the people actually living there decide what relationship they want with the United States, and instead of forcing our divisive politics into their political system. Senator Batra failed because this resolution doesn't give each territory a choice. It only strips them of their voice. But second, the way to pay more than just legislative lip service to those living in our territories is to pay for the veterans' benefits that they've been overwhelmingly excluded from. Because Senator Sylvester, while it isn't clear whether all territories want more representation, it is clear that their veterans are being left behind. Investigative reporter and U.S. veteran Samir Kurt explains in January 2024, U.S. territories have disproportionately high rates of U.S. military service, but have to quote-unquote battle for veterans' benefits. The problem is so bad that in one sobering example, veteran Alex Ortiz and his wife left Puerto Rico and traveled more than 1,600 miles to deliver their baby because it was cheaper than giving birth through the local military medical system. Those who have served our nation have put themselves through battles for us to be able to stand here today. They shouldn't have to put themselves through battles to receive basic benefits. Ultimately, fail today's resolution so we can focus on giving the people what they truly want.
Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 3 minutes and 2 seconds. I repeat again for the judges, that is 3 minutes and 2 seconds. Seeing as this wasn't the first cycle of speech, the chair now seeks 2 blocks of direct questioning. All those with questions, please rise now. That goes to Representative Marks.
So you champion the idea that passing today is ignoring the voices of territorial people, correct?
Some of them who oppose representation.
Yet you only gave an example of the American Samoan people, so how can you be sure that we're ignoring the voices of all territory people when they don't have a voice in Senate to voice their wishes?
Senator, even if it's just Samoa, that's already a net harm. We should be focusing on individual
One country out of the
legislation.
dozens listed in today's legislation is a net harm.
It is, because that's forcing it's forcing the Samoan people to abandon their way of life.
Representative Batra has already said.
Representative Hyder.
Hi, Senator.
Hi.
So, do current U.S. laws and legislation apply to those in those territories?
I believe they do, yes.
So then, isn't it our duty to then give them a voice over that legislation if it's going to govern over them?
I think absolutely, that's a great point.
So then how can you say negation of the legislation?
The problem is that we're forcing them to have representation, which is something that not all of them want to have.
Thank you, Representative.
I think
Seeing
the chair-
negligible time, the chair will absorb the remaining 6 seconds. The chair thanks you. Seeing as that was a speech in the negation, the chair now seeks speech in the affirmation. All representatives with speeches in the affirmation, please rise now. That goes to Representative Tree.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Senator Sree. This is my second time speaking today, and the second time this session. I will begin with a signal from all those voting. According to Medium, citizens of all U.S. territories pay many federal taxes, yet they hold no representation. Does this sound familiar? These people have taxation without representation, and because of this, they must gain more representation. And the first step to that is this amendment that we have here, which we must pass today. Beginning with my first contention, this bill would have a profound economic impact. So let's take Puerto Rico as an example. According to Trading Economics, the U.S. is Puerto Rico's largest trading partner, with 70% of their total exports coming to the U.S. And according to Brookings, currently Puerto Rico has faced a lot of economic challenges because they argue that with more direct influence over their national policies, they could attract more investment and therefore become better economically. They could also receive more federal funding allocations and have a more significant role in global trade and export. According to the Congressional Research Service, they delve into how tax incentives in U.S. territories, such as previous ones that have been given to Puerto Rico, have been used to stimulate their local economy, particularly in manufacturing and exports. This report also outlines how greater political influence in the Senate for the territories could lead to more targeted economic development to make these territories better. If they were able to become states at some point after this, all the territories would produce more GDP combined than 12 U.S. states. Moving to my second contention, the people living in the territories would also gain a lot of positive benefits by this amendment. So Senator Vega, the second-class citizens that you think this bill would cause would happen if this bill is not passed. The 14th Amendment guarantees equal protection under the law, which is interpreted to mean that no state or territory should be discriminated to because of their rights and benefits. U.S. territories, despite being home to U.S. citizens, are often treated as second-class citizens in the status quo with their limited representation in Congress, which violates this principle of equality. Extending full representation would address this once and for all. This bill also helps with human rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that everyone is entitled to a social and international order, which the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration can be fully realized. In other words, by denying U.S. territories representation, the U.S. fails to fully uphold its commitments to international human rights norms that we signed off on. Negation representatives have also talked about the recent public opinion in Puerto Rico regarding Hurricane Maria. But, for example, according to the U.S. Civil Rights Union, Puerto Rico's fiscal crises and the aftermath of Hurricane Maria exposed how a lack of political power in the area leads to human rights violations, which would be solved by having a senator. As our territories, these lands have proved to be important in every way and deserve to be treated that way as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative, for that speech of 2 minutes and 55 seconds. I repeat again for the judges, that is 2 minutes and 55 seconds. Seeing as this was not a first cycle speech, the chair now seeks 2 blocks of direct questioning. All those questioners, please rise. Next goes to Representative. Dude.
I mentioned in my speech that not all of these territories in this legislation actually want more representation. Why should we pass sweeping, indiscriminate legislation that stifles the voices of these territories?
So that's why we passed this piece of legislation that only brings in one senator, instead of granting them full statehood regardless. This allows them to have a small amount of representation that will provide net benefits for everyone without having full
But in the
statehood.
status quo, we've advocated for no representation. As I mentioned with my Samoan example, why should we pass sweeping legislation that doesn't account for these?
Representative Banya.
Okay, hi. So Senator Snyder mentioned in her speech that the reason as to why a lot of these territories aren't given full benefits when it comes to disaster relief is because they don't pay federal income taxes.
That's true.
Should that not be a requirement in order for them to gain more representation in the United States?
That could be possible, but with the senator, they're also able to negotiate for more aid packages that can help them with these.
Why
not large
should they get
natural
the aid
disasters.
packages if they're not paying for
They
that?
they pay a lot of federal taxes even if they don't.
Thank
pay.
you, Representatives. You may take your seats.
Yeah, I thank the chair.
The chair thanks you. Seeing as that was a speech in the affirmation, the chair now seeks a speech in the negation. All those senators who speak in the negation, please rise. That goes to Representative. Sorry, Representative Coleman.
Thank you. My name is Representative Coleman, spelled Coleman. This is my second time speaking today, counting my PO-ship. First time this session. I will begin once I get a simple nod or gesture from my judges, part of the PO, all those above. In December, my family spent a week in Puerto Rico, where we enjoyed the rainforest, beaches, and met many wonderful people. Conversations with residents revealed deep frustration over the U.S. government's inaction following Hurricane Maria. Similarly, a 2021 The Atlantic article describes Washington, D.C.'s residents' frustration over their lack of representation on issues like healthcare and policing. While Puerto Ricans and residents of other